I'm here to talk about why transport is the most exciting area to be working in at the moment, kind of bar none. I think fundamentally that's why I'm here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that, and the programme I'm working on, which is focused on the future of mobility. It's focused on a set of changes which collectively mean, I think, that the transport system of 10, 20 years' time is going to look very, very different to the transport system of today, and why those of us who are part of that are probably going to have a great time shaping the way in which that future emerges, and why the next 10 years are going to be one of the best times, certainly in my lifetime, to be working in transport. And I'm going to do that in a few different ways. I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of context from a government perspective, about why we're spending so much time thinking about the future when it comes to transport. I'll talk a little bit about my specific programme, where I work on self-driving vehicles and connected vehicles, sci-fi-esque technology, which is now looking like it might become a reality. And then finally, I'll just leave you with some areas where we haven't quite figured out the answer yet, some areas where over the next decade we're going to be collectively working to try and solve some issues which will determine whether the direction of travel for transport goes one way or another way. That might not be the last transport metaphor I use during my presentation. So first of all, who am I? So that's my team, the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles. We're kind of there at Greenwich at one of the projects that we fund. We're a joint unit of two different ministries within government, the Transport Ministry and the Business Ministry. And we've been set up to try and keep the UK at the forefront of the development and deployment of self-driving and connected vehicles. And the fact that we have that kind of double angle, that double kind of set of objectives, reflects the breadth of government interest in this agenda. So here are my two bosses. I did check BBC News and they are still my two bosses. This is Greg Clark, who is the Secretary of State for Business, and Chris Grayling, who is the Secretary of State for Transport. And they both have a real interest in this agenda. So Greg Clark is really interested in what these changes might mean for our industrial strategy. How is this going to affect the productivity of the country? How will it create opportunities for organisations working in the UK to serve the transport markets of the future? And Chris Grayling is really interested in what this technology can do to help us solve our transport problems. How can it help improve road safety? How can it improve options for travel for people who currently find it tough to get around? What might it mean for our cities, for our kind of journeys between cities? Who are the winners, who are the losers? How can we ensure this all happens optimally? So, kind of two people with a real interest in this agenda who have set up this team, kind of working across different policy areas in Whitehall to try and make sure that we're making the right decisions. The next picture I want to put up kind of might look a bit boring, but for people like me, this is actually quite exciting. So this is a photo from the House of Commons in July. And I put it up because this was one of the sessions during which an act was passed, the Automated Electric Vehicles Act. That's Claire and Matt from my team sitting in the box. Now this act, among other things, set out an insurance framework for self-driving cars. It was announced by the Queen, as legislation tends to be, a few years ago. When it was, my favourite reaction was on Twitter, where someone said, Britain, the only parliament in the world where someone turns up by horse-drawn carriage to promise everyone else driverless cars. And I start here because I think what I really want to convey to you is this stuff is happening. So a few months ago we changed the law to get ready for self-driving cars. And you can see lots of stories in the news and some hype. There's lots of hype in this area. But the key point that I think I want to lodge is that kind of behind the scenes and kind of below the surface, there's some really, really important changes happening to transport, which are going to have a massive impact for us who work in the area, but also for everyone who uses the transport system. So point one, the context. I mentioned the industrial strategy, and that was a document was published before Christmas, which set out the government's priorities for working with industry to ensure we have an economy which is fit for the future. Now, that industrial strategy, among other things, set out 4 grand challenges, 4 areas where there are massive global trends which are going to have a massive impact on the way people live their lives, and where we in the UK have a chance to be world leaders. And one of those grand challenges was on the future of mobility. And ministers, in the way they do, set out a very ambitious agenda that we will become a world leader in the way people, goods, and services move. And in this section of my presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about why. Why did we land on that area? The first point to make is, as I said earlier, transport is going through a period of amazing change at the moment. If you see any speech by the CEO of a car company, they'll probably say something like, the transport industry is going through more change in the next 5 or 10 years than it's been through in the past 50 or 100 years. And that's not just on one front. A whole bunch of things are all happening and all changing at the same time. We have new modes of transport. It seems like every other week I'll see a story in the news about a new way of getting around. The latest thing, which is getting a lot of attention, is electric scooters. Very big in some parts of the world, illegal, whether you like it or not, in the UK at the moment. But that's one example of many, of lots of different changes which are happening. I've seen electric skates, pavement delivery robots, drones of various different sorts, a huge kind of period of innovation for modes of transport, the things which travel around the transport system. There's electrification. So the government has a programme to try to secure UK leadership in electric road vehicles, but electrification is having an impact far beyond the road system. And the technology which is being developed to serve that need is also finding its niches in aviation and maritime and shipping as well. And electrification is being driven by kind of many different things, largely by regulation, because we're interested in making sure that we have a kind of air which is healthy to breathe, and we're addressing our environmental objectives. But also, as the technology develops, it's starting to kind of find business cases which mean it's optimal for other reasons to invest in the technology too. There are changes to business models as well. So that's a photo of a company called Slide that's operates in Bristol. They do on-demand minibuses, effectively. That's one example of many, many companies at the moment who are trying to change the way in which we consume transport, the business model which underpins it. There are lots of organisations thinking about whether it is optimal for lots of people to travel to basically buy a kind of big hunk of metal, use that for 5% of the time, and kind of travel with kind of 1, maybe 2 people in that hunk of metal going around through the transport system. Organisations thinking about how to use smartphones, connectivity, data-enabled services to demonstrate a system or kind of demonstrate a way of accessing transport which is very different to the one which exists at the moment. And then there's automation, self-driving vehicles, which have been, I think people have talked about self-driving cars for as long as we've had cars. It's been something which I think has been something which has always been collectively in our minds. But over the past few years, there have been some really, really significant developments in the technology, which we might see that kind of hitting the roads very, very soon. So, new modes, electrification, new business models, automation. These changes are likely to create new markets, so new kind of products and services which will be provided for to enable travel. For automation, for example, you can imagine self-driving cars, but automation is also going to find its niches in controlled environments like ports and airports and campuses, theme parks, maritime and aviation applications for that too. Collectively, a wide range of different new markets which might emerge enabled by these changes. And as part of our industrial strategy, we're keen to understand where the UK has strengths. So, and this is just an illustration. For example, in automation, we've got companies that are very good at the control software, at simulation, cybersecurity, insurance companies, legal companies, engineers, kind of telecoms firms, a range of different sectors where we in the UK feel like we've got something to offer to this new market, and that's true of the other areas too. And around that, we're trying to create the right environment to enable this to happen quickly. The right business environment, the right engagement with cities and towns who need to be involved in the process of bringing this to market, the right research, the right engagement with people, collectively the right set of changes which need to take place to make sure the UK is one of the best places in the world to bring this stuff to market in a way which is optimal. But it's worth pausing here, I think, about the difficulties of predicting the future. So I've outlined a set of changes, and I suppose the ideal way in which we hope to bring this forward in a way which serves our citizens. But it's really, really tough to predict what's around the corner, and I'll kind of tell you a lesson from history to illustrate this. This is a photo from London, Piccadilly Circus in 1894. The primary transport mode for a lot of people at the time was the horse, horse-drawn carriages, horses themselves, or walking, as fair as that too. And the major policy issue for people with an interest in transport at the time was horse manure, the environmental impact left behind by millions of people traversing the city using that mode of transport. That was a real bugbear. Lots of people were worried about it, not least because if you extrapolated out the trends from up until that point, it looked like it was going to get much, much worse. So the Times of London published an editorial at the time headed the Great Horse Manure Crisis, predicting that in 50 years' time, every street in London was going to be buried under 9 feet of horse manure. So that's London in 1944, which had many, many issues, but you'll see that being buried under 9 feet of horse manure was not one of them. And that was because something happened which wasn't factored into the dynamic of discussion at the time. Technology found its niche, the automobile, the motor vehicle, and that very, very quickly shifted the dynamic of transport policy. And the problems which seemed intractable, which seemed impossible to solve, and which seemed essential, no one talked about because the world had moved on. And that was something which was very, very difficult to predict and to plan for. I think we kind of find ourselves in a similar position now, but with more urgency given the pace of change. So you must imagine a future, and again this is particularly circus, where all of this technology and all of these changes emerge in a way which is optimal and beneficial for people. We see safer road transport. We know that human error is the major cause of a lot of road crashes. You might see new kind of services emerging in a way which provides a better transport experience for people. You might provide transport options for people who currently find it very tough to get around the transport system because they have physical impairments or they're elderly. And it might free up space in our towns and cities for more useful things than just having cars going around. You might find that cities are a more pleasant place to live. That's like a utopian vision for how it might emerge. At the same time, there might be a more pessimistic kind of view of how this might emerge. You might find that people choose to consume this technology and consume these changes in a way which reinforces negative aspects of the transport system. It might be that it reinforces the way in which people enjoy private car use. It might emerge in a way which doesn't provide those environmental benefits that we want to see, or in a way which clogs up our cities because people haven't chosen a mode of transport which gives those benefits that we're looking for. So we have a challenge within government and more broadly about how we approach that given the amount of uncertainty. What we're trying to do, I think, is to make active choices to help shape the way in which that future emerges, to choose to get involved in shaping the technology and the business models which underpin it, to help ensure that we all benefit from the way in which that emerges. But that's going to require some agile, quick thinking, something, of course, government is famous for, to help us move on that agenda, and some very, very strong partnerships with people involved in advancing the technology and in industry and academia and elsewhere. So that's a bit of context. Now my program. So I mentioned that my program is focused on connected and self-driving vehicles and trying to make sure the UK remains at the forefront of the development and deployment of this technology. We're doing that in 3 different ways. The first way is by establishing a regulatory system which ensures this all happens safely and optimally and in line with the pace of change of technology. We're investing in joint research and development with industry and others, and also we're investing in an integrated testbed ecosystem to ensure we've got the right testing environments to rapidly advance the technology. And I'll take each of these in turn. So, regulation. It turns out that over the years, the concept of the driver has become pretty important for road traffic law, in obvious ways, but also in kind of non-obvious ways. So we have regulations in the statute book which talk about the driver ensuring that people have the seatbelts buckled, that when there's an incident, the driver is responsible for making sure the vehicle is in a safe place. We've got something in regulations about ensuring the driver has a view of the road ahead. The concept of the driver, for obvious reasons, has been woven into the way in which we regulate the road transport system. So coming up with a framework which enables a mode of transport which doesn't involve the driver is actually quite a large task, and one which is going to be occupying my team certainly, but others in the UK and around the world a lot over the next decade. What we're trying to do is to break it down into manageable chunks. So we have 3 different paths that we're pursuing, one of which is around trialling. So what framework do we want to enable the safe trialling of self-driving vehicle technologies on UK roads during the period when we're researching the safety and the applications of that technology. The UK was actually one of the first countries in the world to set out a framework, a code of practice for trialling self-driving cars on roads, and we've actually been copied by a number of other countries around the world, but progress is pretty swift, and we're actually looking at that guidance now to make sure it's still fit for purpose. Then there's something around the vehicle, the standards that the vehicle is approved to say that it's definitely safe to be used on roads. Now, that's a really tough job already for conventional vehicles. The set of tests which need to take place to say that a vehicle is safe for sale are really, really extensive. And the process by which vehicle manufacturers get certificates which say they can sell the vehicles is a pretty kind of intense one, homologization in the jargon. Nevertheless, though, that's fundamentally focused mostly on mechanical processes and fundamentally focused on techniques for assuring safety, which have been around forever. With self-driving vehicles, we've got to try and find a way to show vehicles are safe where they're drawing on some pretty sophisticated software, which is right at the cutting edge of what people in universities are researching at the moment. So at the same time as developing the technology itself, we need to develop methods to demonstrate publicly and transparency that technology is safe. No small task. And we're working internationally with experts to try to do that. And third, regulations on use, the rules of the road, how we go about using vehicles when they're out there in the wild. I mentioned the fact that we've just passed a law which set out a motor insurance framework for self-driving cars. But that's kind of one of a large number of steps that we're going to have to take to ensure that we have a framework which works. For example, do you feel comfortable with a self-driving car mounting the pavement? That's currently kind of against the law, but kind of human drivers do that all the time for various reasons, for one reason or another, which broadly we're comfortable with, or nudging through pedestrians. Or when a self-driving car crashes, who's going to go to court to face criminal charges if someone is criminally liable? These are really, really tough questions which will take time to work through. If you're interested, we've just asked a body called the Law Commission to do a review of these sorts of issues for us. And last week they published a consultation paper, the first of 2 or 3 they'll publish, which sets out some of these challenges. Now, you've got to be kind of have a real interest in kind of flicking through if you want to have a look at that. It's 200 pages long. But for me, it was a really exciting read. That was my summer kind of reading, because the challenges that are worked through there in detail are fundamental to the safe enablement of the technology. So, regulation, something which kind of my team spends a lot of time thinking about. Next up is joint investment in R&D. Now, we in government are over the next few years spending about £150 million on R&D, which will be match funded by industry. And the exciting thing for me is that the investments that we're making are by their design collaborative. So there are really exciting research projects happening all around the world. So Alphabet, formerly Google, have one of the world's premier research programs in self-driving vehicle technology. There are other companies which are also investing huge amounts of money in doing this, and that's great, and all credit to them for doing that. A lot of that, though, is happening kind of in deep secrecy with very small numbers of organisations involved. And I think our view is to have an optimal deployment of this technology, we're going to have to work in partnership. So each of the projects that we invest in has a number of partners. Yes, there are car companies and tech companies, but also local transport authorities, insurance companies, design companies, a range of organisations that we think are going to have to figure out how their strategy is going to change to enable this technology. The way we've designed the programme is that over the years we're making it tougher and tougher and tougher to up the level of ambition to make rapid progress. So this is an illustration of some of the projects that we've funded. The first 3 are now approaching their end, and they've issued their reports. The next few are likely to go live next year. And we're currently assessing the bids into the wave of projects that's going to follow that. And what we want to try to do is set a direction of travel, which in the next few years will lead to commercial deployments of the technology. I mentioned that we've got kind of big companies and small involved in that, which is great. We've seen small companies emerge to become potential world leaders in this space. Oxbotica out of Oxford, 5AI out of Bristol and Cambridge. We've seen organisations which have kind of flipped to try and serve this market. So Westfield made bespoke sports cars up until recently. They're now making pods and shuttles to travel to move people around autonomously. Origo, another kind of really exciting company, but also large car companies like Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan and Bosch are involved too, as well as some computer game companies and others as well. So collectively, more than 100 organisations thinking about what this means collectively for their strategy and for the country. And the final kind of path is our integrated testbed ecosystem. So here, what we're trying to do is to make it as straightforward as possible to take your idea from the testbed right the way through to develop it on the roads. And that's going to require the right mix of simulation and modelling, the right mix of proving grounds, so closed off test beds, and the right mix of real world testing locations to enable that to happen. We've got a few investments we've already made, or we're making a few more in the future, spread out between the West Midlands and London, which seem to be areas where a lot of this activity is happening. You might have seen the one on the top right in the news, because the people developing that project had to answer questions from some people who were worried that they're about to build over a battle site which involved Richard III, whereas I'm assured that everything's fine. So that's kind of an integrated testbed ecosystem that we're hoping will be a one-stop shop, so that organisations choosing where to site their development programme will see the UK as a place which is globally competitive. We're working with an organisation called Meridian who are helping us bring that together. So that's my programme, and this is my very complex infographic which summarises where I think we are at the moment in the world of connected and self-driving vehicles. With the technology kind of racing ahead, amazing developments, something in the news every other week, all very good. Us regulators kind of trying to kind of read the rooms and kind of working very hard to keep up. And then, and really importantly, I think, kind of where are the public? Because this technology, while it's very exciting and the benefits could be immense, it is also for some people very worrying. And that's one of the things I want to talk about next as I conclude my presentation. I want to pick out 3 areas where I think there are unanswered questions, which it's really important we find answers to ensure that we do see an optimal deployment of this innovation. So the first is infrastructure. So within government, we make infrastructure decisions all the time, which have a business case which looks at about 30 years or more. Now, we don't yet know what the infrastructure requirements are going to be for self-driving vehicles, but we do know that if we spend lots of money on infrastructure, which at some point in the future is not going to be needed, that's a pretty bad thing. So it's really important that any investments we make are useful before they become obsolete. And that's something which is a really kind of challenging issue for my colleagues who work in major road schemes or other massive infrastructure projects, so they can tease this through. There are also implications for infrastructure in towns and cities. I mentioned the fact that 95% of the time, cars sit idle in car parks or elsewhere. If they didn't do that, then what would that mean for the space which is kind of left behind by that? Currently, we spend an awful lot of money resourcing space for private vehicles. Could some of these changes change that in some way for the good, hopefully? Second, data. This is the most exciting image of data I could find, I'm afraid. That's a data centre somewhere. So vehicles already gather huge amounts of data, and that's true of most devices that we can use these days. And that's only going to increase in future. The sensors that these vehicles use are going to gather kind of masses of data about their environments, about the users of the vehicles, potentially, and other things too. That could be massively useful. So that could help improve journeys. You'll know exactly kind of what the weather's like, kind of what the journey time is going to be, all that sort of stuff. Excellent. It could help us assign culpability more accurately if there's a crash or an accident, which is kind of fantastic. It could enable new business models to emerge, which will be useful too. But there are really important questions to answer about who owns that data, who gets to commercialise it, who gets to share it, what's the role of the private and public sector in managing the framework for that data. And the final area, so I think it's that we'll need to kind of work through over the next few years, is trust. So the way in which this question sometimes emerges is, would you put your baby in the back of a self-driving car? And that's my baby, Stanley. And you can see he might prefer a self-driving car to my driving if you look at this picture. But that's fundamental and maybe the most important question of all. If people feel like this technology is not serving their needs and they take against it, well, then it'll be kind of it'll be very tough to make the case for it, no matter how useful it could be. So it's really important we can take people with us on the journey as the technology is developed, and that people understand how it might benefit them and how that might be useful in the future too. So A really exciting kind of areas we're working in, transport at the moment, the most exciting I think. My colleagues in government working elsewhere are very jealous. The government's working very closely with lots of partners to try and develop a programme to ensure the UK stays at the forefront. But some really important kind of challenges and questions to answer. And I think I'll leave it there and ask if you have any questions of me.
Hi, you mentioned about data being one of the kind of big questions. I was wondering whether the Department of Transport would have any power in kind of helping companies share data between each other?
So, what we're really interested in understanding what mechanisms might be put in place to enable the optimal sharing of data. Mindful of some of the risks involved too. So privacy, security, potential risks of monopolies emerging if they've got kind of the arms around all the data you might make money from in the future too. What we're trying to do is enable collaboration between organisations that have an interest in the agenda, and investing kind of jointly in data sharing platforms and other things to try and explore the way in which that might work in practice. But I'd be kind of lying if I said we've got the answer yet. This is an emerging field where a lot of the companies working to try and develop technology are still being quite cagey about how much they're willing to share, because they don't yet know what their strategy is going to be and whether if they shared a bunch of data they'll be giving up the crown jewels or not. Now, my sense is there's probably more value in sharing than there is in holding that within small number of organisations, but that's probably a journey that kind of some of those companies are going to have to go in the next few years.
I'm really glad you touched upon the importance of acceptance to cabs, to the general public. And I just want to ask, what have you done already to try and sort of increase that acceptance, and also to say focus groups, for example, and PR, and what's your future plans for that?
Yeah. So actually, I should say that sometimes when I use the word acceptance, I get told off by people who work in human factors and psychology issues relating to technology, because they say that if you use the term acceptance, you're kind of assuming you have a widget, and what you want to try do is force that widget on people, kind of trying to generate acceptance for the pre-existing widget. And what you should be trying to do is putting the user at the centre of the design process, and involving people who might end up being the end users of the products in kind of important decisions about the direction of travel. That's kind of what we've tried to do with our research projects. So most of the big investments that we've made have had some element of user engagement involved with them, whether it's allowing people to have rides in the vehicles, surveys around the technology, trying to get a sense of what people think, but also to get a sense from them about what it is they want the technology to do. Alongside that, within government, we've been kind of researching attitudes and views in a number of different ways. So we have an attitude tracker. So we just published the latest iteration of that relating to transport technology, which asks a series of questions about drones and electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles to get a sense of where people are. And on self-driving vehicles, I think the summary is that people haven't yet made up their minds. I think people find it quite easy to kind of theorise some of the potential downsides of self-driving vehicles. Find it a bit tougher to think about the potential upsides. But the key insight for me, I think, is that they haven't decided. So that's to play for. Potential positive interactions with technology might push them in one direction. Potential negative interactions might push them in another direction. And that's alongside some focus group activity at the same time to try and get a bit more of a sophisticated sense of what people think.
My question sort of follows on from that, really. Some of us might have heard from Uber earlier about how difficult it is to get people to use Uber Pool and share their vehicles. And I think that becomes even more challenging when you take away the driver and it becomes a sort of unregulated space. There's no one sort of in charge. So I wonder if you've done any work around how these vehicles, we can ensure these vehicles are sort of on that shared side of things rather than everyone in their own autonomous pod and the congestion impacts that would probably have.
Yeah, this is a really important question. Has anyone used Uber Pool here? Yeah? No positive experiences, generally? I had a kind of positive experience with it, but it was a bit of a strange one. So I got in the vehicle with two other people. One person who was a massive fan of Uber Pool and just wanted to try and tell me how wonderful it was and how she'd used it non-stop since it started, and someone else who just basically did not want to say a word to anyone else in the vehicle and had his head down in his phone for the entire thing. And that's really interesting and important for the path that the technology ends up taking. So it is probably true that some of this technology will emerge in a more optimal way if it is shared. If people do decide that they don't mind kind of sharing the vehicle space with others. We have some kind of transport modes where that's already the case, buses, and some where that's definitely not the case, private cars. And it's a bit of an unknown at the moment about whether people will respond to the technology in a way which does encourage sharing. What we're doing at the moment within government is trying to identify a set of principles that we think we in the public sector should be adopting to help us plan appropriately for these changes. And sharing is something I think we're spending a lot of time thinking about because of the importance of the path in which the technology kind of will take and whether people choose to share or not. So that's not really a full answer to your question, I'm afraid, but because we don't really have an answer yet.
You mentioned that you're reviewing the code of practice, which has a big implication on cab testing in the UK. What particularly the presence of the safety driver at the moment, with some automation applications that are to do with safety, testing without the safety driver is a natural course of gaining the trust for the use of those vehicles. So how do you think the code of practice is going to change in the next few years based on your review?
Well, the primary focus of the work we're doing at the moment is around transparency, actually, trying to ensure that people know what's going on, because I think that's probably an important enabler for people to trust the technology too. So we're very open to safe innovation in the UK. You currently don't need to apply for permission to do trials of self-driving vehicles, but we do think it probably would be beneficial for more people to know about what's going on, particularly the public authorities that are involved in helping to support those trials. Now, the safety driver, that's a very kind of challenging thing to try to work through the process for thinking about how that might not be part of the trial. I think that both for actual technical reasons and for public acceptance reasons, having kind of someone in the vehicle concurrently is very important. At a certain point, though, the technology will be ready to take that person out. And I think that within government we'll be, I guess, having those two things in mind. Is the technology ready? And what is the way in which the people advancing the technology are handling the public communications around that to reassure people that it is safe?